The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains, where the host, Caleb Hanks, talks really slow and almost like William Shatner at the beginning. But I am your host, Caleb Hanks, who talks really slow and kind of like William Shatner at the beginning, and I am joined, as always, by my good buddy and incredible co-host and incredible buddy host, Austin Burgess. Brother! How are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty well tonight, man. How about you?
Man, I am so lost. I feel like I could say, see you in another life, brother. Oh, I'm not really lost at all. But you and I have laughed about Desmond so many times.
I mean, he's got to be like top 3 favorite Lost character.
Yeah. I only have 3 favorite Lost characters.
yeah. There's some pretty unlikable people in that.
Yeah,
so,
the rest of them suck. But welcome again, everybody, to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. And tonight we are talking about a subject that a lot of you probably have never heard of. And I think it's an incredibly fascinating, I guess, paranormal phenomenon. But I think we're potentially getting back into the realm of paranormal vortex, God knows what. But today we are talking about a place that I can honestly only kind of ascribe to as being Brown Mountain-esque.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I've heard people refer to it as the lesser-known ghost lights phenomenon of Western North Carolina, or of North Carolina in general. So, Brown Mountain definitely gets the bulk of the attention. It has the X-Files episode. It has the Ancient Aliens episode. So, it gets the Hollywood attention. But I will say Thomas Divide is pretty spot on similar from everything I've seen personally and video-wise.
Yeah. Today, we're talking about the Thomas Divide, or as some people call it, we've got Brown Mountain lights at home.
If you live in Cherokee, hey, that's your name for it, I guess.
But it is a very strange thing because, again, it's kind of one of these, potential ghost light phenomenon. There's also speculation that this could be a similar occurrence as to what is happening at Brown Mountain if the Brown Mountain lights are some naturally occurring, ball lightning or ball lightning adjacent phenomenon. But it doesn't quite stop there. There is all kinds of stuff going on at the Thomas Divide. Now, I personally have never been there, but Austin, you lived a little closer to there than I did for a number of years, and so you were able to get out there quite a few times. Or did you just go out there after you moved away and you just made the trip?
I'd been there before, but I'd never actually seen anything I could describe as a Thomas Divide light until that night after we were at Harris down in Cherokee.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty interesting picture. I'll drop that in the Patreon for everyone to see on that. You can make your own decisions on that, but it's a pretty bright, glowing, orb-shaped object on top of the mountain that I would say I describe as maybe lasting 15 to 30 seconds before kind of flickering out.
Yeah. And I've seen pretty similar things to that at Brown Mountain. Nothing that maybe stuck around that long. Again, it's always kind of been these relatively questionable illuminations that were, however, right above the tree line, which I found to be a bit strange. Was that kind of where those were coming up for you?
It was basically right at the tree line because at first, at my first glance on it, I almost thought it was a star. It was shining that bright. But then, further looking at it after snapping a picture, you could see that thing's basically it's still on the ridgeline, but it's right up top there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unless that's, some St. Elmo's fire that's just gotten really, really intense, who knows?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of theories, and I think a lot of those kind of repeat or carry over from what people think of the Brown Mountain Lights. But like we kind of mentioned in that 2-part series, there was still no definitive explanation or conclusion reached on those with, hundreds of years or at least over 100 years of study on that. And, from what I've kind of found on the Thomas Divide, these sightings actually predate sightings of the Brown Mountain Lights, according to some Cherokee elders.
Well, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So, how did you ever first even hear about the Thomas Divide? Because you were the first person that ever told me about it.
Yeah, and I think it kind of came from mostly being interested in the Brown Mountain Lights. Maybe I think I found something online, maybe a YouTube video of the Brown Mountain Lights I was watching where someone just made the comment, you should check out Thomas Divide. Lights appear there more frequently than Brown Mountain, which that definitely caught my attention when I saw that. And then, doing some research on it, there's not a ton of sources online outside of a few news articles. There's something from the Western Carolinian, which is Western Carolina University's newspaper, but I think that article went back to 2001, so it's pretty dated on that end. And there's another source, the Southern Spirit Guide online, that has some information, and it kind of gives some background onto the whole phenomenon in general, but really kind of the similar ties to Brown Mountain, but with a little bit of twist of some of that Cherokee tradition that we talked about in our last episode, which I think kind of adds another layer of mystique and mystery to itself. Because we mentioned in the Brown Mountain Lights episode, there is that common story of the war between the Catawba and the Cherokee and yada, 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 that supposedly is the spirits of the Brown Mountain Lights, which is actually just a bullshit story.
Yeah.
These stories that people were gathering on the Thomas Divide, which is right there, right outside Cherokee, a lot of them are coming from either locals that live in the area or elder tribe members. So I'd put a little bit more significance into what these people are saying.
Right. So let's just say, if you're around Harris Casino or something, how long does it take to drive from there?
Probably about a 15-minute drive. You kind of go through the side of town that's closer, following along the river, past the museum, going into almost the entrance of the Great Smoky Mountains entrance they have kind of on the opposite side of town, where you could get up on the Parkway. And after that, I'd say maybe 5-minute drive on the Parkway, and you could be at the Thomas Divide overlook. But, before I get started, I should probably say, so there's not confusion on this, because there are a few different places or locations that have Thomas Divide in their name. Just kind of separating these out so people aren't confused on this. The Thomas Divide itself is actually a ridge on the North Carolina side of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, basically right outside of Cherokee. It serves as a natural watershed divide and helps define 2 major valleys within that area. And now the Thomas Divide Overlook is the lookout area that I was describing on the Blue Ridge Parkway. That's located at mile marker 464. That's just outside of Cherokee, and it overlooks the Thomas Divide Ridge. And that, from what I understand and from my experience, is the best viewing area for the Thomas Divide lights themselves. And now there's also a Thomas Divide Trail, which is a trail that goes along the other side of the Thomas Divide Ridge, opposite to what you're seeing on the overlook, and goes along that ridge for about 14 miles, and it eventually leads up to an area called Huwahi, which was formerly known as Klingman's Dome.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So it kind of goes along that big stretch of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, but it's not an area that is accessible or visible from the Thomas Divide Overlook itself.
Right. This is kind of a weird question, but compared to the Brown Mountain Overlook, would you say that the elevation is almost relatively similar to that?
Yeah, I'd say so, because I guess with the Brown Mountain Overlook, you're pretty much looking kind of across the gorge eye level at Brown Mountain. With this one, it's roughly the same. I think you don't have to crane your neck to look up at the Thomas Divide itself, but it's still a little bit higher than the eye level you're probably sitting at with the Brown Mountain Overlook.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I was just kind of interested or at least to paint a mental picture for myself of what we'd be looking at compared to the Brown Mountain Overlook there.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think a little different with the Brown Mountain Overlook. My argument is that's not exactly the best place to go look for lights. You have all that traffic coming through. There's constant kind of light pollution with headlights coming through.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much experience on that specific overlook. But, with Thomas Divide, it's still an overlook off the Parkway, but I don't think you're getting that heavy amount of traffic, specifically, later at night. Most people up there that time of night are kind of going to look for the lights, from what I understand.
Yeah.
It's definitely a local tradition, and I think that's kind of one of the things that a lot of people in the Cherokee area and within the reservation and Qualla boundary, they've definitely grown up knowing about this, but it's not something they've really published and didn't really reach the full kind of paranormal circles like the Brown Mountain Lights did. It didn't get tied up in the UFO crowd like the Brown Mountain did.
Yeah, which is honestly, I don't know, in some ways kind of a good thing, because I don't know, I think it's kind of cool to have something that's a bit more niche in that regard. But I'm assuming that the parking area is not quite as large as the Brown Mountain one, because that thing is massive.
Yeah, I mean, you still probably have room for at least 10, maybe 15 cars to park at Thomas Divide Overlook from kind of what I'm remembering. So, it's not like you could have a big group outing there, but you could still fit quite a few people in if you got a group going to look for the lights or doing some sort of meetup.
Man, that's another one we'll have to do, is a Thomas Divide meetup.
Yeah, for sure, man. But yeah, before I get too deep into this, I did kind of want to cover a little bit of background and history on how the Thomas Divide got its name, because man, this is a pretty wild story. I don't know if you looked into this.
I actually didn't, but as we get into all of these, it almost always ends up being a wild ass story. So I'm buckled up and ready to go for it.
I mean, this one might take the cake if I had to say so myself.
Oh, dude, I'm excited.
So Thomas Divide was actually named after a man named William Holland Thomas, who is most known for his time serving as the only white chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
Did this inspire Dances with Wolves?
I think so, honestly.
Wow.
There's quite a few movies and adaptations that have been inspired by Will Thomas. So,
and old Kevin Costner just had to rip him off.
Yeah, right. I think it said there was at least 3 or 4 where there was a play adaptation, Hollywood adaptation.
I mean, it makes sense. Just in that sentence, it's a wild story.
Yeah, exactly. So how he got to be there, a little even crazier, honestly. So he was born in basically rural Haywood County area sometime around 1805. And unfortunately, his father died shortly before his birth. So he was basically raised from his mother, and he started working at age 13 to help support his mother and family. And he started working at this merchant store that was owned by Congressman Felix Walker, and it was right there in Cherokee territory. So to help William out, he learned to speak the native Cherokee language, because this was going to be pretty crucial for him doing business, working at a merchant store there.
Sure.
But by age 18, Thomas had actually opened his own store within the Qualla boundary, or Qualla Town as it was known at the time. His knowledge of the Cherokee language really just helped him thrive as a businessman. And basically, he expanded to open 2 additional stores by the late 1820s. So he basically made himself pretty known, pretty trusted within the Cherokee community there. And I think they started to accept him because during his time, he became friends with the principal chief of the Cherokee at the time. Don't know 100% if I'm pronouncing this correct, but I'm going to do my best on this. Yungasku or Yungaska. Anyways, the principal chief of the Cherokee became friends with Will, and as a result of this friendship, he was adopted into the tribe and given the name Will Undi, which means Little Will, because of his small size.
Oh, man.
So I thought, what a perfect tie-in after last week. And
that's ridiculous.
That's pretty great. So even after being adopted by the tribe, he continued as a businessman, and he actually began to study and read law and act as a legal attorney for the North Carolina Cherokee at the time. And he was helping them draw up simple plans of government and allowing them to coordinate responses to some of these state and federal government policies that were happening. Keep in mind that they're still fighting for rights to live on this land during the struggles that were happening.
Sure. I will just jump in real quick. If you weren't getting why we were laughing at his Indian name, go back and listen to our episode about the Cherokee Little People, and it'll all make sense.
Yeah. I think that's all we need to say on that. So recognizing that Thomas was really devoted to the tribe, he was really invested in their future, helping them exist within these complicated government structures of the United States. As the chief was on his deathbed, he handpicked Thomas to succeed him as the new leader of the North Carolina Cherokee. And that was in April of 1939.
That is so crazy.
Yeah. Apparently there was another tribe member that was pretty upset by this, and he argues for the legitimacy of Will's time as the chief leader, but this is what all documentation shows. So it shows that the person arguing was I don't know the technical term, but basically the assistant chief while Will Thomas was serving as the leader. I think they probably did recognize him as a worthy leader at that time. And I think he really kind of went on to prove that, because he went on to continue to fight for Cherokee rights against the state and federal government. ended up buying land on his personal dollar and then donating it back to the Cherokee tribe. And that's 50,000 acres that today make up a large portion of what is the Qualla boundary. So he really did, put his money where his mouth is and kind of go above and beyond to make sure that his people were taken care of on this.
I think it's a pretty interesting tactical move on the elder that appointed him, because I'm assuming he probably was like, this guy is going to have more power within the other white folk.
True.
And he can be an advocate for our people.
That diplomatic angle.
Yeah,
almost.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a smart move.
Yeah. So he went on and with the assistance of Thomas, in July of 1948, the U.S. government officially recognized the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and recognized their claims to the land. So he was instrumental in getting the EBCI formed and their rights and claims to what is the Qualla boundary today.
Man, well, look at this guy doing some good for him rather than just like stomping all over their folklore and claiming that the BS that they made up is Cherokee.
Right. He does have a little interesting, I guess, twist in his life a little later here.
Oh, come on. Don't kill the hero.
I know. I've got to just to cover all angles here.
Yeah. But, all right, let's do it. Let's hear it. What'd he do?
So he ended up, after this, he entered into politics after kind of, helping the EBCI be formed. And he worked on the North Carolina Senate, where he served, I guess, from 1849 up until 1861. But he continued to support legislation that helped support the Cherokee and actually worked on lobbying for support for transportation to be improved to actually bring the Western North Carolina Railroad to that area as well. So still did a lot of good for Western North Carolina. But then as 1861 rolls around, he decides to leave politics as a proud Southern patriot to go fight for the Confederacy, where he enlisted in the Civil War, was eventually promoted to colonel, and commanded what was the 69th North Carolina Regiment, which was actually made up of a handful of Cherokee soldiers that joined him to serve in that unit. Didn't know about that. Pretty interesting, interesting twist on that.
Yeah.
And Thomas's Legion was actually the last of the Confederates to surrender in the Civil War, and they only surrendered after learning that Robert E. Lee had just surrendered a few nights prior. So after that, Thomas's mental condition really started to deteriorate, and he was declared insane in March of 1867 and was committed to a state mental hospital in Raleigh. Now, this one's kind of weird to me because despite his condition, Thomas still assisted Smithsonian Institute researcher James Mooney, who I mentioned in the previous episode was responsible for recording and documenting so many of these Cherokee traditions and history. He lived amongst the tribe for 10 years there.
Yeah.
But apparently he still assisted James Mooney by telling him tales of Cherokee history and life ways that was used for official documentation. Now, I don't think that was James Mooney's only or probably primary source, considering he was declared, mentally insane at the time.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of questionable why he was still being used as a source on that. But he probably was, going through spurts where he had a little bit of more cognition at times, and he was able to share some hopefully factual information.
It's when he started talking about the Cherokee flying unicorns that they stopped paying attention to his historical records.
Right. So Thomas eventually died in a mental hospital in Morganton and was buried in Waynesville. So I'll say that man had a hell of a ride of a life.
Dude, I mean, when Kevin Costner's stealing your story, you got something good.
Yeah, no joke. So I think the fact that this area was named after such a culturally relevant figure from Cherokee tradition for itself, while it might not be the most well-known or, if you're looking at it, it's kind of not exactly the most impressive view, kind of like what you would think about Brown Mountain. It's not like the biggest mountain. It's not the most eye-catching, but it is something that they definitely aspired some significance to name after William Thomas. So
sure. Yeah.
I thought that was kind of an interesting backstory on that one.
Yeah, dude. I mean, most paranormal phenomenon do not have a backstory like that.
Yeah, no joke.
or mountains, Brown Mountain, it's got some history, but that's wild.
Yeah. And I don't think anything pertaining to Will Thomas specifically is ascribed to this light phenomenon that we're talking about, but nonetheless, it's still some pretty interesting history for the name.
I mean, heck, he did enough crazy stuff while he was on Earth, so who knows?
Yeah,
it could be him.
You never know for sure. So yeah, as we mentioned, this Thomas Divide overlook area really has become this kind of hotspot on the parkway for locals. And I think as time's gone on, there are more people that have kind of picked up on this that might be interested in some of the paranormal aspects and looking for some of these areas that they could actually go see something. You know, that's such the appeal to the Brown Mountain areas. You legitimately have a chance to see something weird and unexplained. So I think that started to catch on with the Thomas Divide. There's, you know, when you go up there at night, last time I was there, there's probably 3 or 4 cars parked out waiting for the lights. It's kind of a communal thing for people at this point. But a lot of people report seeing the lights. They report to appear, flicker, burn, and kind of fade throughout the mountain range. And similar to the Brown Mountain lights, they even rise in the air. And again, sometimes they're reported as light, but sometimes they're reported to change colors to red or blue, or even kind of flicker back and forth between some of these colors.
Yeah, I was looking a little bit into it today. And, you know, sometimes when you can look at stars and they can appear different colors and kind of be flickering. And I've actually had friends call me before and been like, I'm looking at this crazy star and it's just going insane. And that's actually because it's being distorted via the atmosphere and heat waves and things like that. But, you know, it's kind of interesting to think it's like, okay, when you're witnessing them up above this mountain, are they experiencing, you know, some sort of like heat fluctuation that's coming off the earth and actually changing the colors of it?
Like a mirage effect almost, or something like that. Or like the common thing when you're in really hot areas and you swear you see the water, the wet road in front of you, but as you keep driving, it's all dry.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, it very well could be. That's pretty interesting thought on that. But I will say, another aspect on these that's a little bit different than the Brown Mountain lights is when you're looking at, you know, Brown Mountain or Table Rock, there are ATV trails. There's campers that frequent that area. So a lot of times you have to be pretty discerning when you see a light up there. Are you seeing somebody's high-powered lamp? Are you seeing a headlight? Or are you seeing something that is truly mysterious? But with Thomas Divide, the land's naturally protected. There's no public access to that side of the road. So what you're looking at is just thick, heavily wooded area that these lights that you might see on Table Rock, you would not expect them to be in this area of Thomas Divide.
That's a pretty unique situation because, like you said, in Brown Mountain, there's any number of things that could potentially be the cause of something that you could, you know, interpret as being an anomalous light. But over here, you know, you kind of have a little bit of a control on the situation. That makes Thomas Divide in some ways a bit more of a pure area to be able to investigate.
Yeah. When you see something, you could, I won't say instantly assume, but
yeah, it's just easier to narrow down what it wouldn't be.
Yeah, exactly. So there are some pretty, what I would consider goofy traditions in trying to make the lights appear. Did you read any of these? Yeah,
you just say Helen come forth 3 times.
That's one of them. It's lights come forth now. They're even worse, unfortunately.
Oh, great.
Some people claim that if you pull up to the overlook, face the divide itself, you flash your headlights and honk your horn, and this activity will cause the lights to somehow become more active.
I'd hate to have a summer home there.
Yeah, no joke. Some people even claim that they tried yelling at the lights and they believe that they somehow enjoy this sort of interaction. But I don't condone any of that, but it's still part of the local lore, if you will. So if you ever drive up there or drive by there and see somebody honking their horn or flashing their high beams at the side of the ridge, they're probably just trying to summon the lights.
Well, as a grumpy old man in the making, I cannot stand loud noises outside. Please, people, please stop making noise like that. Please, for the love of God, stop.
The lights probably don't like it.
The lights don't like your weird noises. Get out of there.
Maybe I'm speaking for the lights. I should probably just shut up here.
Well, can we not just observe in relative silence?
Right.
I mean, you can talk, but
yeah. We don't need to summon them or whatever it is. But yeah, those are kind of the urban legend, whatever, local lore on how to make the lights appear.
Well, I actually did witness firsthand somebody trying to use a method somewhat similar to that to summon the Brown Mountain lights the last time I was there.
Yeah, I think I've heard people doing that. What was it, like a flashlight type of?
No, a guy was playing a drum.
Oh,
He
okay.
was up there playing kind of like a bongo.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of us, my brother and my wife and some other people, and we had just randomly gone up there. Cindy Peters was there with us.
Okay.
The owner of the Brown Mountain
Yeah.
in there. I don't remember if that's exactly what it was called when she owned it, but these were just some other people that just kind of showed up, and I thought it was kind of funny that he's just like up there playing his drum and like, hey man, you do your thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't really bothering anybody, so.
Yeah. Whatever. If it helps him bring the vibes in, more power to him, I guess.
Yeah.
One thing that is similar to Brown Mountain again is these lights are said to be best observed on a clear fall or winter night. And I will say, just when you go up to that overlook, it gets a little overgrown during the summer. So just the leaves alone make it almost difficult to have the best view that you can. So it's probably another piece on why fall or winter is best for that viewing area. But again, you hear that about Brown Mountain as well. Those are the most commonly reported times of seeing the lights.
Yeah, a lot of that's attributed to the idea that there's potential, like, heightened electromagnetism in the ionosphere and things like that that could be, potentially making a better atmosphere for a ball lightning phenomenon to happen, which, there is a lot more static in the air around that time of the year, as far as I understand. Maybe I'm lying. I don't know anything about science, but might as well check it out that time of year because the view's better too.
Yeah, there you go. So, I think one thing that I really wanted to look at with this episode was, we spent 5 hours really digging into the Brown Mountain lights and the Brown Mountain series itself. And I just want to see if there was anything that we took or we might have learned about the Brown Mountain lights themselves and see if we kind of apply that explanation to the Thomas Divide. But biggest issue with that is no one still knows the true origin of the Brown Mountain lights. So we're still kind of performing guesswork at trying to kind of take one case and make it overlap there. But I will say, I think that's kind of an interesting kind of case study experiment on that, is see what common threads you can find between the two areas.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think you like I said before, you run into a lot of those similar theories with the Thomas Divide lights that you hear with the Brown Mountain. Everything from portals, like Alan Greenfield says, to ball lightning, like Dan Caton has hypothesized, to even some sort of plasma phenomenon similar to what Josh Warren and the Lemur crew kind of was working on studying down there. But that true definitive origin still remains unknown. But if you go back to our Brown Mountain series, we did mention a team of scientists from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which operates as a component of the Department of Energy, that investigated the Brown Mountain lights back in the 70s and 80s for about a 10-plus year span. And as I mentioned in that episode, I kind of alluded to sending a FOIA request for the Department of Energy to see what records we could find on what the Oak Ridge National Lab was studying or what they found during this. So I basically sent that FOIA request off to the DOE with every variation of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, with Brown Mountain, Linville, any of these keywords plugged in, but to no avail. The FOIA request came back stating that the Oak Ridge office of the Department of Energy completed its search of files, but did not locate any documents responsive to the request, which, I thought was kind of weird, right? Like if they had a team of scientists studying this phenomenon for over 10 years, don't you think there'd be some kind of documentation they would save?
Dear Mr. Burgess, we're writing to inform you that the intern that we made go look through all the old boxes of stuff got really mad that you filed this to begin with and quit.
I would have loved that'd be framed on my wall right now, trust me.
Therefore, your inquiry unfortunately has come back N/A.
No, I actually dug a little deeper, and maybe this is a little misunderstanding on my part, and maybe it just wasn't clear in the original source material, but upon further investigation, I realized that the group that was studying the Brown Mountain lights was made up of scientists from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but they were officially operating as an organization, basically as a private entity separate from the Oak Ridge National Lab and the Department of Energy, and therefore the United States government.
They called themselves the Gleamer Team.
No, this one is, they operated as Orion, which is the Oak Ridge.
I've definitely heard of Orion before.
Yeah, Oak Ridge Isochronous Observation Network.
I think that Bill Fox might have talked to me about Orion.
Maybe so, because this was basically, from what I understand, made up of a group of scientists from the Oak Ridge National Lab that, from what I could see, they basically formed this as more of like a hobby club organization as opposed to some sort of like private sector top secret classified reasons. But
oh yeah, I know for a fact that the name Orion was floating around when when I would be talking to people like Josh Warren about.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of probably similar to the Lemur team, or like what Dan Caton and his crew were. It was a group that was maybe professionally linked to something, but that professional organization they worked for did not attach their name to what they were doing with this project.
Right. Yeah.
Either way, I think it explains why these records weren't subject to the FOIA request. And I think this next part really explains everything even further, because I found their website, which was hosted on WordPress.
There you go.
So probably not part of the government.
Probably not, but I wouldn't be surprised.
And their About section states, our original goal was to perform correlated instrumented observations of atmospheric and astrophysical phenomena. This was sparked by the Brown Mountain Lights of North Carolina. And Orion's mission is to support science research, teaching, and amateur astronomy in East Tennessee. And today they are associated with the TAO Observatory in Rockwood, Tennessee. So again, I think this was definitely a group made up of probably some pretty serious scientists, but was operating as more of a hobby, personal interest, desire to figure out what's going on with the lights than the actual Department of Energy studying it. Which,
Sure.
Maybe that was a mistake on my part. Maybe it just wasn't clear in the source information. But either way, I'm glad we could kind of clear that up. But then going back, with them being, basically a hobby organization, I figured they would publish some of their findings. And from what I found, it's pretty limited. But they did put some articles out there, and there were some interviews with some of the members of the Orion team. And actually, one of the members of the Orion team was actually an associate of Dr. J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book fame.
No way.
So there was some credentialed scientists working on this project for sure. Perhaps kind of what led to Brown Mountain being mentioned in the Project Blue Book files. Maybe they were sharing some notes. Maybe that kind of got tied in and tipped off Hynek on something that they were looking into. Who knows?
Do they list their names on their site?
It doesn't list all the names. There's only a few interviews I found that basically people come forth and claim that they were a former member or a member of Orion. So there's no membership directory or anything like that.
And they seem to be loosely just still some form of an organization.
Seems like they're loosely associated with this observatory in Rockwood, Tennessee. They probably do some sort of like classes or some sort of group club meetups or something like that. So would be interesting to try to get in touch with them on that. But I did find their website hadn't been updated in close to 10 years or so. So
yeah.
Who knows?
Could be worse. But I just find that really interesting because, God, it's like, dude, do I actually know some of these dudes?
Maybe you might have crossed paths at some point. Yeah. So like I said, their findings were ultimately inconclusive, but they did attempt to test various theories during their investigation, ranging from trying to simulate light refractions, which apparently they had some success with, trying to basically get certain conditions to refract high-powered lights that would make some sort of orb appear to be over the horizon. And apparently they were able to recreate that with some success. But again, that doesn't explain every single light people see on that. So they also tried to reproduce a plasma phenomenon, probably similar to what Warren was working on with Yost?
Yeah.
Yeah, so probably something pretty similar. And who knows, maybe they were working together on that. And they also tried to test some sort of piezoelectric effect through trying to simulate some seismic activity up there. So
I mean, it almost sounds kind of like how they've done, and I think that they even do these in parks like Disney, but they'll do the thing where they kind of like, they project a bunch of lasers into a bunch of mist and try to make,
that's exactly what I was kind of picturing in what the documents and interviews I was reading. So
what some of these things have been trying to do is essentially recreate, how like Princess Leia will pop out of R2-D2.
Yep.
And she's got the little 3D hologram, it's all throughout Star Wars. But yeah, I've seen some very impressive displays of things that people are working on in that regard. And I don't know all the science behind it, but it's pretty wild to know that these guys were working on that sort of stuff like all the way back when, they started this organization or whenever it was they did.
Yeah, 70s and 80s. And, obviously technology's probably improved since then, but the fact that they did study this with, what I would consider pretty sound, whatever you want to call it, hypothesis testing on this, they had some of the brightest minds working on this and still couldn't reach that conclusion. So
sure,
I think that just adds another layer of the mystery. But when I was looking through some of these articles that provided some insight on the Orion investigation, There was one that mentioned Thomas Divide, and it actually claimed that it had a similar geological terrain as Brown Mountain. So maybe that's some of that common thread that they're kind of looking for on that to test out to see what the correlation is. But I thought it was also interesting, for as little known as we've been talking about the Thomas Divide is, this is obviously on the Orion guys' radar back in the day too. So
sure, yeah.
The section also kind of contained a collection of comments that had been collected about the Thomas Divide from various blogs and social media sites. And I started making a list of my own, but I found in this article, they really had what pretty much summed up everything you could really want from the whole Thomas Divide experience. So I'll start reading a few of those quotes here, starting with this one. I've seen almost the same thing happen and some pretty scary stuff up there. I saw something shoot up like a firework and rock back and forth into a U shape and then just disappear, along with red, white, and green lights appearing in different spots of the mountains. This other one, I saw the lights on June 24th, 2009, while on a cycling tour around the United States with another friend. We were at the Thomas Divide, and we were there specifically to view these lights. He told me about them, and we were very curious. I am an amateur astronomer and aware of various atmospheric effects that might cause something like this, and I was left stumped. They look sort of like car headlights moving horizontally back and forth against the peaks at a distance, perhaps 10 miles away, but then they'd change altitudes. Sometimes they'd stop, or reverse direction, or even turn red. Never saw them in the sky. They were always against the backdrop of the mountain ridge. I do not know what they were, and can't really think of what they might have been. A truly mysterious phenomenon. I thought that was interesting. You know, he's amateur astronomer, sure, but the fact that he's generally aware of what he's seen, he's probably more cognizant than most observers of something like this.
That is obviously Lance Armstrong writing that.
Yeah, of course.
We all know that he's a cyclist and amateur astronomer.
An amateur paranormal investigator.
Lance can do it all.
Here's another. We go up there often, and we usually always see something. Last night, we saw a red light. Before, we've seen white lights. The lights move in abnormal ways and go far too fast for it to be a hiker. We love going up there. One of my friends refuses to go back because last time he saw the lights, they were watching at a distance, and suddenly the lights came up to their car and surrounded it and circled it fast. My husband's Cherokee, and most all of Cherokee land is haunted in some way. Now, the fact that they have a friend that's claiming these lights came up to their car and circled it.
That's pretty interesting, right?
That's
there.
quite the claim. You know, I've heard of similar, and keep in mind, this overlook it's a chunk of a ways from the ridge itself. So these lights would have had to book it to get all the way across there and up to the overlook to surround this guy's car. But again, we've heard of something like that around the Brown Mountain, of them basically creeping their way up the overlook.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem in that description that they're like flying around the car pretty fast. And I don't know that I've ever heard of, one of the Brown Mountain lights doing something in that specific behavior. Mm-hmm. But man, that honestly makes me even more interested in the Thomas Divide, because it's like most of the time when you go up to the Brown Mountain, you're doing a lot of sitting and a lot of watching and not seeing a lot of anything. And I think that you probably run into a decent amount of that at Thomas Divide. But it's cool to have another option to potentially witness if it is the same atmospheric phenomenon, to be able to see this thing. So
for sure. And this is the last one that I'll read here, but this person says, I have seen various colors as well. My husband and I go regularly, and last time we went, we brought a pair of binoculars. We saw 3 lights, but they did not come up to our car. They came about half the distance towards us and then started to move up and down the mountainside. They appear to be very small ships of some sort. I do not get a negative feeling from them at all. I bought a detailed map of the Great Smokies and found that Mingo Falls is pretty close, but there are no roads or hiking trails that are close to it at all. I had to chuckle at the ships part because we said it didn't get caught up with the UFO crowd, but...
Oh, well, there you go. That's pretty interesting, though, that they're reporting that.
Yeah. And the fact that they did do their due diligence. They went and looked at a map trying to see, okay, this is roughly the area that we saw it in. What's close to here? They found a waterfall, but there's no, easily public access to it. So I think
you say it's Mingo Falls?
Mingo Falls is what they claim. Mingo. Not something I'm extremely familiar with.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that.
Yeah. Still, I thought that was definitely, worth mentioning on that one. There's a few other of these comments that kind of go on, but a lot of it kind of starts to repeat itself. Some of these theories of ball lightning come in and come up again. But the whole thing of people believing this whole area is mystical is kind of a common theme that comes up again and again and again. Let's just, make this clear. This is right outside of Cherokee. So if there is something somewhat supernatural happening there, it's something that the Cherokee are probably definitely well aware of. And I think it's, a good idea to kind of start diving into some of what I would consider the local legends and alternative theories around this. And I will say there's a lot of them that kind of tend to be more of that, just kind of like a local lore, than something that belongs to Cherokee tradition. But the fact that it is coming from locals that do live there on the reservation, I do put a little bit of credence into it. But I wanted to start off with this one quote that came from one of the articles that talked about some of the mysterious things and happenings in Cherokee. Simple but effective quote, and that's, "To the Cherokee, the supernatural is just natural." Pretty self-explanatory on that. They deal with a lot of unexplained elements that come into play and throughout their tradition and legends, and they have a lot of stories that kind of ascribe significance to that. So as I mentioned, with the Thomas Divide, there are some of these ones that I would consider more of that local urban legend, but then there is some tellings that come kind of directly from Cherokee tradition. I think the most popular legend that I've seen most commonly involves a Cherokee shaman who attempted to remain on the mountains basically during the time of the United States government ordering the removal of the Cherokee from the land. The shaman believed he could secretly remain on the land with his family, and they basically went into escape into the caves of the mountains. But unfortunately, many of the natives that fled into the mountains were tracked down by the soldiers. The shaman was tricked into turning himself in to save his family, but was then executed as an example to the others. According to this legend, his body was dismembered with parts spread throughout the mountain. The Thomas Divide lights are said to be his spirit attempting to locate his scattered limbs.
Ouch.
Yeah, no joke. This one sounds like it could come from Cherokee tradition, but it also sounds like something that could just be kind of made up and tried to force its way into that. And
sure,
in my opinion, I think that's probably more of what it is. But again, as I mentioned, local lore has a little bit of a different meaning when it's coming directly from the town of Cherokee.
Yeah, I was reading up a little bit about some of the folklore surrounding the Thomas Divide today, and one of my favorite things that I read, and I'm sure you're most likely going to cover this, so I will just mention the very...
If you want to go ahead, by all means.
You're going to know more than I do about this, but the whole idea that it is the Cherokee giant Judicola that is hurling fireballs across this. I just break the desk here.
That was Judicola. That was a fireball.
Just hurling fireballs out over the the expanse of the ridge there. And I just, ever since I started kind of getting into Judicola Rock, Judicola Rock out there next to Western Carolina University was the catalyst for me getting into the lemur team, because Josh had asked me to go up there because he found some stuff around Judicola Rock that he thought was indicative of there being a big cave up there on the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And lemur team subsequently did a massive investigation where we had like multiple teams, and we went up there on top of the mountain to investigate this. And ever since I saw Judicola Rock and started learning about this and learning about the lore, surrounding Judicola, I've always kind of had these images in my mind of what I think that Judicola would look like according to, how they described him. And I love that imagery, especially when you equate it to something like the Thomas Divide. Because again, we always get into this idea of enriching the lore. And I just love the idea that there's this ancient deity up in the mountains throwing these fireballs. It's just cool as hell, dude.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when you and I go down the rabbit hole with the Greek mythology thing.
Oh, yeah. I could easily see this being in those classic Greek mythology movies, too.
100%.
Just chucking the fireballs.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if this one is something that really belongs to that proper Cherokee tradition, or if this is kind of that local lore that's borrowing a piece from Cherokee tradition, which is the Judicola, which I think is pretty neat in itself. If that is the case, it's kind of a continuation of their lore on that. If that is what's happening here.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to mention, I think Judicola Rock and probably Devil's Courthouse itself are its own episode, but have you heard that there are other rocks similar to Judicola Rock that exist, but they're on private property?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is outside of public knowledge. But I mean, one of the reasons that we did this whole expedition was Josh told me, he's like, if you go to Judicola Rock, and maybe they've moved this at this point. I know that the rock is still there. I know that it was sinking into the ground. They've essentially excavated it.
And they built a little observation deck around it too. I don't know when the last time you've been back is, but that's probably been for
years.
10 years or so.
Yeah, it's been longer than that since I was out there. But back in the day, you would go to Judicola Rock, face the mountain behind it, essentially, walk a couple of paces, and there was this rock, very small, about a foot long, that had an arrow pointing to a mountain down the way. And Josh stood there and was looking, randomly finds this arrow. The leaves were off the trees at this point. So he looks up, and up there on the ridge, it looks like a giant cave.
Yeah.
And so that's why I got into the lemur team, because he's like, if you can just get up there and tell me if you can see a better view of what that might be, I'll let you in the team.
This is the example of, we need the interns to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we get the young guys. Yeah. I mean, dude, I was, a teenager and I was so into it.
Yeah.
I was interested in, he gives me this task. I'm like, say no more, fam. Like I was so down to go check that out.
Yeah, that's definitely a future. We've got to do a Judicola episode in the future for sure.
If I said too much on that, I'll edit some out.
No, you're good. I think we got plenty to dig into still.
Yeah.
One of the other theories on this ties back to our previous episode, and some people say that these lights are even lanterns carried by the Yunwi Junsti.
Oh man.
So
that is beautiful. I love that.
If you missed last episode, definitely check that out, and it kind of gives some foresight. But if you did miss that and are confused by what that term means, that's what is referred to as the Cherokee Little People, that can range from helpful to mischievous depending on their clan, with some believing that they live in mountains on the side of mountains within caves, potentially within the Thomas Divide Ridge.
Dude, that makes me want to either make some art of it or get my wife to do a painting of that.
Would be
because
awesome.
That just sounds so beautiful to me.
It really does. I really like that explanation. And again, I'm not sure if that one is, directly what Cherokee tradition kind of ascribes to this, because there is some definitely some things that might imply that, but I do really like that explanation there. And I will say, I think I sent you this podcast episode when I first told you about Thomas Divide, but the folks at the Creep Geeks podcast had a pretty interesting experience during their investigation.
Yeah, I listened to that.
Yeah. So they've got this whole van that they've decked out. It's got cameras on it, and they basically take it to do some live on-site investigations. And sounds like when they were at Thomas Divide, they parked. They were the only ones at the overlook there, and they reported starting to hear voices whispering, rustling, kind of footsteps coming from the woods. And they started reporting that they were hearing what sounded like pebbles being thrown at their van, just little, like small rocks, like little tings that were happening. Like something was being thrown. And then they even claimed one of them had seen some sort of small humanoid figure scurrying across the Parkway Road that they claimed to be on all fours. Now, she said that this is not something she brought up at the time because she didn't want to influence the other's perception of the investigation. But in hindsight, kind of looking at the experience they had with all the whispering, the potential pebbles being thrown, I think their theory on that was, did we just see a Cherokee little person?
Sure.
So
yeah, and if you're kind of attributing that to some of the lore, there are, and we get into this in our full breakdown in our episode about the Cherokee Little People, but there is a bit of a trickster tribe.
Yeah, for sure. But as I mentioned, and I will give credit where credit's due on this, one paranormal investigator, his name is Michael Rivers. Not sure if you've ever come across him in your time. He's from the Smoky Mountain Ghost Trackers crew. But this is something that he's been investigating for multiple years, and he was able to gain the trust of multiple Cherokee elders who have claimed that they have family stories of the Thomas Divide lights dating back as far as the 1700s, which I mentioned at the start of this episode. That predates any known reports of the Brown Mountain lights by a pretty significant chunk.
Man.
So these elders claimed that they believe the lights are the guardians of the mountains, the life and the secrets of the Cherokee people. So to me, a little open for interpretation on that. There's some ties on what the Yunwi Junsti might actually be. Are they these spiritual entities? But the other thing that kind of ties, my thought back to that is something we mentioned on our episode with the little people as well, and that's the entities of the Nunehi, which are a supernatural spirit being from Cherokee legend, sometimes referred to as the immortal ones or the people who live anywhere. And, I think this is definitely its own topic that we'll explore more in the future too, but that's at least the first thing that comes to my mind with that description that the Cherokee elders give on that.
Yeah. Well, hearing some of these stories and some of this lore surrounding the Thomas Divide, this makes me even more want to go to Cherokee. And I hope that they are still doing this, but, I've been told that they'll have some of the tribe members come out and they'll do kind of like a campfire thing where they will tell a lot of the stories of the folklore.
Yeah.
I would love to hear that there and in person and from the members of the tribe.
For sure.
So badly.
Sure. Yeah. And this is one that I don't know if it's commonly spoken about. I think from what I understand that Michael kind of had to really put in some dues and, basically gain the respect of these Cherokee elders for them to share what was basically oral tradition that had been passed down for generations, but he had multiple elders telling him the same origins on that. So, out of all these theories, I think I'm going to trust whatever the Cherokee elders are saying on this one.
Sure. Well, that's incredible. That he was able to make that connection with them,
Yeah, for sure. I think that, a lot left open for interpretation, but it goes back to that concept that we kind of constantly go back to is when you're left without a scientific explanation, or at least our current understanding of science, you kind of have to go outside of that sometimes. And I think that kind of that Cherokee spirituality is kind of right in the middle there, that it's very interesting to explore.
I agree. And I also feel like after talking about some of the stuff and like you're mentioning, going outside of the ideas of, traditional science, it's almost like we should get in touch with somebody that, I don't know, kind of dabbles in, just the world outside of science and has looked at the science itself, but also high strangeness, but like
a magical approach to the world.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
But I mean, who would we even get?
Put some thought into that one for sure. But I like this. We'll get back to this. I'll definitely think on that one.
Yeah.
But this other tie-in I did want to bring to your attention, and I'm not sure if you're fully aware of this, but as I previously mentioned, the Thomas Divide Trail that runs on the opposite side of the ridge, it actually intersects with the Kanawha Fork Trail.
Oh, no doubt. Really?
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you missed last episode or the Boojum episode where Caleb went into some of his experience there, I'll just pass the torch off to give you a little brief summary for our listeners here.
Well, yeah, I lay it all out in the Cherokee Little People episode, but basically I went up into the Kanawha Fork Trail there in Cherokee in the middle of the night with my brother and Brian Irish and started hearing distant drumming. And yes, it is very plausible that this could kind of be just somebody out in the woods, but I will say we were pretty far out there, and this is something that is directly attributed to the lore of the Yunwi Junsti.
And you guys were following a Bigfoot lead out there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I can't remember if Micah told this when he was on the podcast or not. I think he briefly mentioned it, but I believe he was talking to some Cherokee tribe members that spoke very frankly about there being a Sasquatch-like creature or species in that area. So
yeah. I'll touch on that here very, very shortly. But also, as I mentioned, the Thomas Divide Trail leads up to an area now known as Kuwohi, which was formerly known as Klingman's Dome. A lot of people probably know it for its big UFO-looking observation tower that's up there. But when you're following the trail, there's actually what people describe as a secret tunnel that's actually located right underneath the road that leads up to that observation tower. It's known as the Thomas Divide Tunnel. It was built in the 1930s by a group known as the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they were founded by the FDR administration to provide manual labor jobs to unmarried and unemployed men related to conservation and maintenance of government-owned land. They basically built this tunnel to prevent hikers from having to cross over onto the main road leading up to the observation tower, basically trying to prevent hiking traffic from automobile traffic and crossing over, and even some of the horseback travel that was occurring on the Thomas Divide Trail at the time. They were trying to keep that from having that intersection or that crossway with the automobile traffic. But I don't think there's anything paranormal in nature about the tunnel itself, but a lot of people kind of report it having a mysterious aura or vibe to it. But I think that just kind of goes along the lines with it having the name, the secret tunnel of the Thomas Divide.
Sure. Have you been to that tunnel?
I've not actually spent any time on the Thomas Divide Trail itself. So didn't know if that was something you might have intersected with on your Canati Fork
No,
expedition.
definitely not. And honestly, man, I don't know that I've been to Klingman's Dome since I was like a kid.
Yeah, I feel like I went there with my family when we first moved here, I think. But I'm not entirely sure.
I guess whenever the roads are open to get there again.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's kind of not sure on the availability of that, but I know like Mount Mitchell is still closed off. So like
I think that they're trying to get like up towards Mount Pisgah. The word on the street that I had heard was that they were trying to get that open by, the fall leaf season.
Okay, of course.
I don't know if that's going to be the case because the landslides up there that affected the roads and the parkway were, I mean, God, who even knows at this point how many there were?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever that does open back, definitely be on my radar and look out for the future because would love to go up there. The UFO observation deck thing, UFO shaped observation tower, I should say. It just looks cool. It just looks like a big flying saucer in the middle of the mountains.
That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen that thing.
Are you sure?
Maybe.
I'm sure you have. That thing is, maybe I'm like overselling the UFO similarities on it, but it's just like this big, it's on a pole and it's just got like a big base with a little smaller top over it. I don't know. We'll put a picture up there for it.
Maybe I'm just having like a total mental fog right now, but it's not ringing a bell for me.
Oh,
for some
interesting.
reason.
So anyways, that observation tower sits at what is the highest mountain in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park that stands at 6,644 feet. And, as I mentioned, this area was formerly known as Klingman's Dome. It was originally known as Kuwohi by the Cherokee, but later renamed Klingman's Dome after, of course, the Cherokee were forced off their lands by U.S. government. But the name Klingman's Dome was inspired by explorer Thomas Klingman, who famously and incorrectly claimed that this mountain was the highest mountain in the region, but that title actually belongs to Mount Mitchell.
Yep.
I think those two kind of had a bit of a pissing match back and forth over who discovered the tallest mountain.
Yeah, bro, my mountain's taller.
Exactly. But I did think this part's really cool and wanted to tie it in. In 2022, members of the EBCI began a movement to restore the original name of the mountain, and this movement was supported by the National Park Service. And on September 18th of 2024, the U.S. Board of Geographic Names approved the name change back to Kuwohi. So
awesome.
They won out in the end, which is pretty cool there.
That's amazing.
But that area itself, when you start looking into some of the weird occurrences and happenings up there have been multiple Bigfoot reports. There have been multiple UFO sightings reported. One of the UFOs was described as being a silver rectangle, while the other was described as, get this, triangular.
Boom. There you go.
And there's even some alleged footage of a Bigfoot sighting. I'll put that in the Patreon there. It's up to you to make your own conclusion on that, but it's out there. So we'll throw it up there.
Let me guess. It's blurry.
It's blurry. It's in the snow.
Okay.
But there's some heavily padded big figure, and that's all I could really say.
A blob squatch.
Yeah, a blob squatch, if you will. But the fact that this area is tied to some other weird reports just kind of furthers that layer of mystique to me.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, in conclusion, that kind of wraps up most of what I've been able to really dive into with the Thomas Divide and specifically the Thomas Divide lights. A lot still up for interpretation on these, but going back to what I mentioned before, if I'm going to go through any of these theories on what I want to choose to personally believe, I think I'm going to trust the Cherokee elders on this one.
Well, I appreciate so much of everything that you do for bringing, the historical aspect, the folklore aspect, all of the research that you bring to the table for this podcast. And dude, once again, you've knocked that out of the park on this. And I think that this is a really interesting and special episode because, we're coming off the back of our Yunwi Junsti one day. I promise I'm going to learn how to say it right. Episode. And this just deepens that entire mystique and mystery, and also, just another odd phenomenon that is just showcasing how just incredible this place is And even in the event that these are not physical manifestations, the folklore is incredibly magical and deep and beautiful and storied. And I just love hearing about this. And I love that you're bringing to the table, a place that not a lot of people have heard about, but I think is, if not more, just as interesting as Brown Mountain. I've kind of find it to be, honestly, a little bit more interesting at this point in my journey than Brown Mountain, mainly just because of all of the information that, we've gone over about the little people, and also the fact that this area is kind of this unaffected portion of the mountains that may be this kind of geological hotspot for whatever this, potential ball lightning-esque phenomenon is.
Yeah. And I think that is something that definitely, should be repeated here as whatever investigative opportunities we have, or anyone out there has, when you could kind of get in and really deep dive and discover some common threads between these places, that really might be a key towards leading toward a deeper understanding of what's causing some of these unexplained ghost-like phenomenon.
No doubt. And dude, we're going to have to get up there, do our own stuff, film a bunch of stuff, throw it on the Patreon.
For sure. Hopefully not have some weird humanoid figure on all fours crawling across the parkway when we go up there. But if we do, makes for good content, right?
I mean, look, you might not want that to happen. I kind of do, to be perfectly honest.
I mean, I say that now. I probably, I don't know. I just do not know. This is one that I'm just so interested and intrigued by. I don't know how I would react in the moment if I was to come face to face with something like that.
I mean, I probably would be pretty freaked out by it, but I think that I would have a better time dealing with witnessing a Yunwi Junsti.
Mm-hmm.
I would have a better time dealing with that and wrapping my head around that than I would waking up in a gothic Airbnb with an old woman standing in my bedroom watching me sleep, who then subsequently fades away.
Okay, valid. Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a bit of a tangible aspect about this, to where it's like, oh my gosh, this is a freaking humanoid species that is alive here on the planet and needs to be protected, rather than, holy shit, there's a weird old lady standing in the corner that's been watching me sleep, and she is also fading off into the ether of the universe, and now I'm never going to sleep again.
Yeah, I could agree with you on that. I'll give you that one for sure. But again, still don't know how I would react come face to face with something like that.
Well, I'm not saying I'd keep my cool, but I think what I'm saying is existentially, I'd be better off with a Yunwi Junsti.
Yeah, understandable. I think I'm completely in agreement on that one.
Well, man, that was amazing. Thank you so much for putting all of that information together.
Yeah,
and I always love talking with you about this stuff, man. And any closing thoughts?
And I think I'm just going to jump back to the same thing I kind of repeated last week, is that once you really kind of dive in and explore and further understand some of this Cherokee tradition and legends, I think that gives you a bigger insight and perspective to the world itself, in particular, the world of high strangeness that we live in here. So I just want to give my respect to the entire EBCI and the town of Cherokee, the Qualla Boundary itself, because we truly admire that area and the culture and some of the interesting, unexplained occurrences that y'all have going on down there.
I couldn't say it any better myself, and I completely echo everything Austin is saying there. The Cherokee community is incredible. We want nothing more than to enrich and bolster and, spread the word of how amazing their community, their culture, their people, everything about Cherokee, how amazing it is. And we just are glad that we've been able to use this platform to be able to talk about those things, and if nothing else, just inform ourselves about how amazing this culture and this folklore and these people are.
For sure. I think the personal education has been such a big part of this for me, because I'm interested, I'm intrigued by the unexplained paranormal aspects of it, but just learning the historical relevance and significance of so much of this and how so much of these weird stories tie into history has been pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And I will just echo one more thing that we said on our last episode. If you do go looking for these things, please be respectful of these people. Please be respectful of this land. And we can all look into spooky things. Just clean up after yourself and don't be a butthole.
That should be a sign.
Oh, yeah. It might be a Ghost in the Mountains t-shirt.
Just a Bigfoot with a "don't be a butthole."
Yeah. He's like the new Smokey the Bear.
Only you
cannot be a butthole. Speaking of Sasquatch, I do want to do a very, very quick shout out as we're closing out this episode. And I want to just say a big thank you to Mark Childress of the Cryptid Crew podcast. And I was just on his show.
Oh, yeah.
I think that will be coming out probably before this one does. But Mark is a wonderful person. He has done a lot of independent research about Sasquatch and different cryptids. And he, started his podcast journey a little bit before we did, actually. But I had a wonderful conversation with him, and we kind of went into some of our favorite ideas of Sasquatch and some of the stuff that got us into the whole thing. And he and I were reminiscing about a classic episode of In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, where there was
nice.
And I don't know if you remember this one or not, but did you ever watch that show?
Yeah, totally.
Did you ever see the one where it's the kid and they're camping out and the Bigfoot walks over and he hears the footprints or the footsteps, and then the Bigfoot looks down at him?
I think this definitely rings a bell.
Man, we'll look it up on YouTube after the fact, because it is one of the most classic scenes, and I loved it so much growing up as a kid. But we were just kind of going down the rabbit hole of, just the media like that was around that kind of got us into this, and also Monster Quest. We were talking about that for a minute. But please go give the Cryptid Crew a Google search, the Cryptid Crew podcast, and please go give Mark a listen. And I appreciate him so much. Having me on, and he was incredibly complimentary of our podcast. And, I want to help a fellow researcher of the weird out and send some folks his way. So
yeah, that's awesome. Can't wait to hear the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, I just want to say this podcast has become such a wonderful thing for both me and Austin to do. We both love doing this so much. Every single time I get in here, man, I'm super cozy. I have a fun time. I always learn some stuff. We make something that a lot of people have written in and told us it makes them incredibly comfortable and cozy hearing us and just feeling like they're in the room chatting with us. And man, that means a lot to know that we're making people happy doing this.
For sure. I mean, that's the whole reason I started listening to podcasts in the first place is, I wanted to feel like I had friends that were talking about the same stuff I was interested in and wanted to talk about. And when you have those ones that make you feel like you're part of the conversation, it's always resonated with me. So I'm glad we've been able to share that same experience.
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for listening, for writing in, for buying t-shirts, for the whole thing. Me and Austin want to do this professionally. We want to make this our job at some point. We would love to be able to make our, life being able to make this content.
I want to be a professional weirdo.
A professional weirdo. Oh man, I was already a weirdo. Now I want to be a pro. But thank you all again so much for listening. You have been listening to Ghosts in the Mountains. You can go to ghostsinthemountains.com and you can find out everything we got going on. We've got some merchandise over there. You can subscribe to us on Patreon for a completely ad-free version of the podcast and some other little perks like behind-the-scenes things that we do. And once again, thank you so much for listening to Ghosts in the Mountains, and we will catch you all on the next episode. Until then, stay spooky, everybody. But hey, let me just say real quick, dude, if I'm out there, oh my God, I don't know, dude. If I see a Yunwei Junsti, all right, let's say it together. Yunwei Junsti.
I think we could just say little people at this point. I mean, that's the direct translation, right?
No.
Okay.
No. We have to learn the ways. Either way, I'm going to be scared as shit.
Yeah.
If I'm in any of that situation, I'm scared. All right, good night, everybody.